Do you have any recommendations for how I should ingest this backlog of episodes? Also, I won't hear your advice until long in the future, once I catch up on the episodes.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 450 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam, and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is January 12th, 22x4. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be just huge volumes of profanity in this show. Sometimes
Fuckloads.
continuously.
Reams.
Yeah.
Reams,
So hopefully
reams and fuckloads.
So hopefully you switched off before Adam got one in there.
Hey, the warning. You said the warning.
It was
I
out.
said the warning, and if you don't immediately switch off, that's on you.
Yep.
How much
So this
do you
is
really care?
episode 450?
Yeah.
Yes.
Every
That's
so
a
often
lot.
when we're Seth's rattling off the numbers, I'm like,
Yeah.
It's funny. It's getting to a point where I'll be like reading the intro. I say the number, and I just see Sam's expression. Like,
you're just like,
what the fuck?
what?
But I think it's also telling because we started this podcast when Sam was going through his cancer treatments, and the idea that we would have recorded 450 episodes was kind of. I mean,
I
things
wasn't really in the cards at that time.
we weren't thinking that far ahead at that point because
Yeah,
we
we were
couldn't.
just doing it because it
It's-
seemed like a fun way to spend some time, But then here we
Yeah,
are. I guess
so-
roughly 9 years later then. since
Apparently, I hope it's still a good way to spend time because, I mean, that's a lot, buddies.
Yeah.
That's a whole lot of time spent.
Yeah. So thank you to everybody who's, put up with all of our nonsense for the past
Nine
nine
years?
years. That's just
ish.
That's just
It's been pretty cool.
Yeah.
Also, we'd like to thank our supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net who are donating monthly to help support the podcast. If you'd like to support the podcast, just head on over there and we'll grab that money. All right. Now, there's not much going on this week. I mean, there's a lot going on inside the studio in terms of we're just cranking out stuff for Crashlands too. A lot of stuff, actually. It's kind of disorienting, actually, how fast things are happening
a lot
sometimes.
happens quickly. Yeah.
But we're gonna focus on just a couple things. We're just gonna talk a little bit about what's going on in the industry, and then we want to get to some listener questions because we missed those for a couple of episodes. All right, so basically the big thing that's happening this week is layoffs. Just more layoffs.
But
So
that's
we
been
had-
true every week for
not in our studio, like just everywhere
Just in
else.
general.
So the big ones this week were Twitch, Discord, Google, and Unity. So Unity, I think, was about a quarter of its staff. Discord, about 17%. Twitch, I think, like 150 people or something like that.
It's a lot. It's like it ends up being, I think, when you also include then the Google ones, which are there's like some question marks still about exactly how many they're cutting because they were kind of vague about what was happening.
I don't know if they even know how many people work there.
They have
or how many-
180,000 employees, which I don't even.
so many. Yeah.
That is even.
Yeah, and this is what boggles. Like anytime I hear about these layoffs, where they'd be like, "Oh yeah, we fired like 300 people or 1,000 people." Those time I'm thinking, how did you have 1,000 people being
place.
productive at all? Like, have you ever been to school and done a school group project, and you get like 4 people together and you can't achieve anything with 4 people, right? And it's like, what if we had 4,000 people and they had to collaborate and work on something?
Yeah,
how does that work?
It's like the scale of this stuff is so crazy to think about, right? Compared to like where we're used to the spaces we're used to operating in, which is literally like the studio is the size of a team, right?
Yeah,
It's
and
not-
I
there's
understand
not
it for
difference.
things like let's say you're Amazon, you need people to drive your trucks. There's so many deliveries like that. Obviously, you
hard
need
limits on like
X
physical
number of
bodies,
people.
right? Yeah.
But when we're talking about a tech company who's their focus is they're delivering code, they're creating code and they're deploying code. That's their whole thing. And yeah, there's a lot of server infrastructure that they need and stuff like that. But that's also very scalable. You don't need like 8,000 people to have some servers, right? So like,
But
what's
maybe you
happening?
do. This is what I'm saying. Like I don't know. Running a business at Google scale, I don't know how the fuck that works. truthfully. Like,
But also, so much of it is like customer service and like legal stuff, and like
which ends up being in similar ways like the truck problem, which is like you kind of just need a certain number of people compared to however big
you're trying to
user
manage the
base is.
sheer input volume, right? Because if you also think about, because like the scales on both sides, right? Because like, yeah, Google's got a just stupid number of employees, right? But also think of how many people use Google services.
Yeah.
Right? All of them, just all of them do, all the people. And so now you have to try, like, so think about like when we launched Crashlands back in the day. You know, there's 3 of us, and then 1 million players or whatever it was at the time.
And we're just dying.
And we were dead. We were just dead, right? And it wasn't even because like we weren't doing like individualized, customer support. It was just the deluge of stuff was what caused us to kind of drown, right? And trying to like pick out the signal from the noise and all the stuff that was coming in. So once you scale it up, like that's going to keep, like that stuff doesn't scale well, like the way to be able to manage it. But especially if you like, this is like, we learned that lesson. So we designed our whole studio around having that interface between the outside and the inside be manageable and scalable and handleable so that we don't have to just like throw people at the problem, right?
Which is true of Google or whatever. Like anytime as a customer, if you want to try to interact with these companies,
you can't.
You cannot.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why I'm like, do they really have that many customer supports there?
Right,
like even if they
creators are like, I can't get my videos remonetized when they accidentally copy struck them. I've been trying to talk to someone for like 7 months, and
this is what the thing is like. Even if Google had, because it's like the copyright striking system is automatic, right?
Everything's automatic.
It's automatic, right? But it's okay. So now let's say you need to do something that requires a person to look at it, right? So that's automatic. You have literally 1 billion people using YouTube, right? And the sheer number of copyright strikes coming in constantly, right, must be outrageous. Even if you had 500 people, human people, whose job was to then like evaluate those, they would never touch the backlog. It would be an infinite growing list. As in, like, it actually doesn't matter how many like support people you throw at a problem. Can't. So, which is to say that, notoriously, all these large companies have terrible customer service, right? And they should somehow do better. But also, I don't think it's that they like don't have people there. I think it's that.
But that's all I'm saying is that's the only it's basically data centers and customer service. Those are the parts where I'm like, I understand why you would need a large number of people to manage those aspects of things, right? But then when it comes to like the production of the code and like the maintenance of the software and all of that, how do you have like, let's say you have like 3,000 people working on programming
like software
website.
Engineers.
How? Yeah. What is going on there?
I don't know.
We saw this with remember when right when we left ClickUp because it was so fucking unstable and untrustworthy, right?
Which we don't know if that's true anymore.
We don't know if that's true, but it may not be. But at the time,
yeah.
like we couldn't trust anything. Like we'd put an input and it would just evaporate, and our automations would
trigger. Or it would save for a while and then it would
go away.
Come back the next day, it's gone. You're like, what the fuck?
So as soon as we lost data like on 3 occasions in 2 weeks, and and that was when we were like, okay, to switch. And then if we looked at their customer support portal, which is basically just an open sort of feed of user complaints, right? The top thing by far was everybody else complaining about the same problem, right? It was just like, we can't trust this service. So we'd been gone, but we were also signed up for the newsletter and stuff, and we saw that they put out this big blast. We're like, we hear you, classic corporate speak. We're like, we hear you. We've hired 200 engineers to solve all of our reliability and performance problems, right? And we saw this, and we were like, to do what? How does that?
Our collective response was, "Oh no!"
How does that? Like a good thing we got out. Make it better. Like how?
Yeah, because if you take 200 people who have no experience working in a code base and you set them loose on the code,
but also
base,
who weren't in the organization before, right? Meaning like you're taking an organization that already exists and then you're just plopping in 200 more people, all working
just basically
together.
A whole other organization.
It's a whole other organization that because it now has to bootstrap itself from scratch. It has to come up with its own ways of doing things. It has to how do they do anything? Right.
I think it's kind of the question because like when I see these layoff numbers, which like again, this is not to say that getting laid off is any kind of like value judgment on the people who get laid off from the stuff, right? Because it's like it just sucks. You know what I mean? sort of no matter what, if you're the person actually getting laid off. But what I think is lost always in all the reporting, because there's so many people, right? We're talking about like literally thousands of people every week at this point in tech losing their jobs. I'm not like, I haven't gotten any of the like actual, here's a person, here's like what they were doing, and like here's what happened to their team or what, like I haven't gotten. There's no site.
We saw that with Twitter, and then with the that first round of Google layoffs like a year ago, that huge when they fired like 12,000 people, whatever. Mm-hmm. We saw because those ones were also like a particular kind of layoff where it was just like a cut as much as you can, basically at random, right? And those and a lot of the stuff that we heard about that too is like people coming back into the office the next day to their gutted teams.
Oh yeah, when their shit didn't work.
Yeah, and they're all for that one, right, where they come in and they just weren't allowed in, right? But then once we got past that window, and like every team had just randomly lost a person, the whole teams were gone, right? And so everyone came back and they're like, we don't even know who's around anymore, like a weird, dark, horrible vibe, for everybody. So we heard a lot about for those really big ones, but then ever since then, with these,
I feel like it was that people were able to go into some depth about like what was happening, but it's like right now it's just big numbers, and there's so many coming out that you don't actually hear any like little internal pieces about like what.
Well, it's also possible that I think that depending on the state, non-disparagement clauses may or may not be legal, right? Yeah. And so that also kind of depends where if the company says, hey, we're firing your whole division, here's a severance package, but you can only have the severance package if you sign this thing saying that you won't talk publicly about the conditions.
Is that still state by state? I thought that was federally no longer allowed.
I don't remember but like that's the only reason I could think of as to why you'd have like 10,000 people all lose their jobs in tech in a week, and then like you don't hear from any of them.
Well, it's one of those things too, is that even if it's technically not legal, they can still put it in the thing to remember about law is like it's just lawyers and judges fighting each other, right? That's what it is. But you could try to do anything. You could try to do anything you want and then see what happens, So. Because I think a lot of that still, especially in because you see this a lot in the employment sort of space where somebody definitely got fucked by something, and it was definitely illegal for that to happen. But then when the question comes up of like, I mean, this is obviously a suit you have available. It's like, well, now you have to sue somebody though, and then go through all of that and go through the expense of doing that, and because law is basically arbitrary. Then it doesn't actually matter what's legal and what isn't. It depends on what the judges and the jury say, depending
enforceability is always the big question.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, that does actually lead right into our first question. If you guys want to get into it. All right. So the highest upvoted question from podcast.bscotch.net comes from Captain Jazz, who asks, this one is for the former law student. Given how Levelhead uniquely manages to distribute player-made levels via the marketing department, is it possible for Bscotch to trademark or patent that game mechanic? Further, if some unnamed AAA studios were to use this mechanic in their unannounced game of Something Maker 3, would Bscotch have grounds for legal action, or is all of this impossible due to game mechanics being public domain? So all right. So first off, you got to think about the difference between a patent, a trademark, and a copyright.
Okay.
So if you wanted to try to like legally lay claim to something like this, it would have to be a patent.
Yeah. Right. Which is essentially saying it's a particular invention, right?
Yeah. Because a patent is a way of doing something.
So there are rules about patents. So you have to have something that is patentable, which I believe is like, it has to be like a process, a machine, something. So like this would fall
into
the
non-obvious.
process.
There's a collection of things. Again, all of them though are
debatable.
So, it's still arbitrary.
So technically, something like what we did with the marketing department in Levelhead is a patentable concept. It actually, something most people don't know is that the concept of writing data to a physical disk drive is patented. And every company or every company that makes hard drives is violating this patent. Every piece of software that saves to disk is violating this patent. Right. The problem is
that must be an old patent that's out of date now, or did somebody patent it recently? Because again, you could.
No, it was like in the 90s or something. Yeah. And there was also a patent for essentially in-app purchases that everybody was violating just all the time, because that's the second part of a patent, which is the value of a patent comes from suing people. that's how you get the value of
That's
the
also
patent.
why you have patent trolls, right? Who basically just go buy up patents and then sue people who are quote unquote, violating those patents.
Yeah. So if we own this patent, then there's basically two possible things that could happen. One is that another company says, "Oh, we like this idea. We want to do something like that. We want to do that in our game. So we're just going to approach the patent holder and ask them if we can just pay them a license to use this patent."
And then
right?
we'll negotiate for how long they can use it, what their restrictions are, how much they're going to pay us, blah, 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 all that stuff.
Yeah. So that's what could happen. What will happen instead is a company will say, "Oh, we like that idea. We're going to do that." And they do it. And then at some point later, we find out that they've done it. And then
we think that there's money to be made there, or that we're losing money as a consequence of them doing it.
Right. And so then we take them to court to try to get them to pay us a license to use the patent because they've already used it. Right. So like either we would try to get them to cease and desist where they would have to like stop doing it. Or they would just try to do something like take the spirit of the idea and just make a few small changes to it or something so that it's not like technically quite the same.
Thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is how biomedical companies and stuff work when they're making drugs. Is they can issue new patents for a drug that has the same effect, but it'll have like a slightly different molecular composition.
Yeah,
and therefore they can just sue everybody and keep the prices high. Right.
An example is like and it doesn't even have to be a different chemical formulation, right? So you can take Adderall, for example. There's Adderall XR, extended release, right? Which is basically a formulation of the stuff that you put the molecule into so that it basically gets digested at a slower kind of rate. Yeah. And so they were able to then patent that even though, the short term, like the short acting patent for Adderall, like just regular ass Adderall, right? Went out before that did. So people started making generics and they were like, "Ooh, we can do this long acting formulation, patent that one. And now again, charge $300 for it." For the next, because patents last 19 years, I think. Is that what it is? It changed.
I think seven or
I think it's 19
17.
now.
Yeah,
something like
whatever.
that.
What a weird.
Well, and it takes three. It also takes about 3 years to get through the patent process, and it'll cost you at least $30,000.
Yeah, when I was in grad school, they were pushing because I was in biology grad school, so they were pushing all the professors all the time to be trying to get patents, right? So the school had a patent office whose whole job was to be the interface between the stuff that all the scientists were doing and then the governmental offices. And then also, but of course they're doing it on behalf of because it's another one of those fun facts, right? Even if you work for a university, every discovery you make is owned by the university, right?
The university owns the patent for the thing.
Yeah. So they own the patent, and then depending on the university, they'll have different rules about what they actually share with you, that kind of thing. But they also take on the burden of dealing with getting the patent together and dealing with licensing and all that kind of stuff.
It can be a good deal.
It can be a good deal.
Depending.
Yeah, it can also be a bad deal. But my PIs at the time were going through a patent application process for one of the things that they were doing. And we had all these discussions with the people running the patent office at the school and all this kind of stuff. And basically what they told us was that basically it's going to cost the school $50,000 to submit and deal with a patent application. And so what they told us was like their evaluation was like, do we think we can convert the end result of this patent into like way more than $50,000, right? Because if we can, then we'll throw money at it and see what sticks. Because it's like the same sort of like 10x philosophy that everybody else does in investing, right? Which is like,
it's like publishing games.
Make lots of bets. It's like publishing games, like anything, right? And so the bet costs $50,000, and then you hope that one of them pays off in the tens of millions or hundreds of millions or billions even, right?
Yeah, and importantly, patents are essentially only profitable in a few specific industries, largely pharmaceuticals, because the reason you do a patent is for monopoly reasons. You say, I have something that people need or want. I'm going to spend a fuckload of money so that only I produce it, and therefore I can charge whatever I want, right?
And that's also not an opinion you're expressing. That's literally
that's the point of the system. Yeah. So the problem is, in most other things, if you patent it, people don't need it so badly that they have to pay whatever you want to charge, and you can't really recoup the cost of the patent. In pharmaceuticals, that's not true.
It's also the case that in many other cases, like in video games, like you said earlier, there are so many essentially tweaks, changes, whatever else that you can make while still getting basically the effect that change enough of the underlying process. It's not like, again, it's not a drug entering the body.
depends on your willingness to get sued, right? And the litigiousness of the patent holder. So I think a good example in video games was the idea of having a mini game that played during a loading screen, right? Famously, so the patent for that went away just a few, like 3 years ago or something, like really recently, right? That was the reason why you would just have to stare at a loading screen for 20 years, was because some asshole patented that, right? Because there are some things that I think, like, I honestly just believe you're an asshole for patenting. And this is like it's like these kinds of things. Like, even if it is a cool idea that nobody else has thought of, which I highly doubt for this particular one, but that's just greedy bullshit for that kind of thing.
I would argue that patents are only hostile and negative.
Yeah, I think that's a
right. Because if you think
the
about
goal
this,
of them though is to make it so possible so that if you invest a tremendous amount of time and design, effort, whatever else, into something, that you can then recoup right before anybody else. That's
the philosophical purpose, but the practical reality of it is that it's only used to exploit. It doesn't actually.
It's largely used to exploit.
Yeah, because if you think about if you follow this hypothetical scenario through to its conclusion, we patent this thing from Levelhead. Mm-hmm. Nintendo is like, hey, we want to make the next game, and we want to use that system in this new game, right? Now, if then we sue Nintendo,
oh my god, no,
we have lost, like, in every possible way. Yeah. Like, people love Nintendo. They don't know who we are. Yeah. We will immediately
Nintendo's
be
one
a
of the
pariah.
monopolies that we depend on for our financial success, right? And they can
also
they can arbitrarily decide,
litigious.
and they're famously litigious and have really good lawyers, and they know
who doesn't have
in and out.
Yeah. So, like, we would probably lose. They would still get what they want. Everybody would hate us. And we would have spent 3 years and tens of thousands of dollars getting this patent just to shoot ourselves in the face with it. Like, there's no good outcome
The
to that.
vast majority of the time, a patent is not worth it. And again, like, the main use case is because you think you can take advantage. It's almost always because you think you can take advantage of somebody else using it, so you can sue them for violating your license.
Yeah. Importantly, people talk about how the inventor of the polio vaccine did not patent the vaccine because he said, I want everybody to have access to this, right? That, to me, just drives the point home that patents are outwardly hostile to social progress, equality, and access. Right. Mm-hmm. Like, it's basically saying, I'm going to take as much as I can from everybody for as long as possible while giving nothing in return, and stunting innovation, research, and progress in this field for the next 2 decades. Right. That's what a patent is for. Yep. And also, I think notably, back when the patent system was created, in the frickin' like 1700s and 1800s, technological progress wasn't quite as fast as it is now. And so the idea of spending like 2 decades inventing something and then getting 2 decades of market capture on it, it was like, yeah, that's reasonable. Like, and now it's like you take a year to make something.
Outdated mechanism for trying to protect
basically all of our intellectual property stuff is just
it's all
and it's one of those, like,
work.
Each one of their sort of concepts has a good sort of philosophical underpinning for what it's for.
Of course,
right? Yeah. But even like discounting the valid point that today is very different from 200 years ago, right? Even then, this is one of those, like, everything is a shade of gray kinds of problems that actually honestly isn't solvable. It's not a solvable problem, like protecting intellectual property, right?
It's always a balance thing, right? Where you're trying to make it so, like, in this case,
you're always doing the best that you can. Yeah. But in a system where the governmental institution that basically defends, or basically because basically what you're doing when you're getting one of these intellectual property defense things, right, is you're calling on the power of the government to defend you, to defend your intellectual property, right? And to help you define and make claims about your intellectual property. So, like, when that governmental system and the way that those things are defined can't adapt at all in any meaningful way to reality because it's too slow and there are too many competing interests involved, so that even if it was fast, that wouldn't even make it better, Like, that's the reality of the situation that we're in.
It's an impossible problem.
All of it falls apart.
You get down to, I think.
It's an impossible problem.
And I think you saw this with some people talk about copyright, and there's always this stuff in music. I know recently, like, Ed Sheeran, I think, got sued. Just a couple months ago, it was in court for someone was like, you took these, like, 4 notes this particular progression in one of your recent songs. And the thing is, like, this has been, people have done this like every decade. Someone does this where there's some record label thing suing someone for essentially like using, quote unquote, using a chord progression or something like that. And it's largely been decided that it's the same way in video games, which is like mechanics are not, they're not things that you can like sue someone else about. The specific designs of like a song chord progression, you cannot sue someone about. If you literally, sample their song, you know what I mean? Like you took a piece of their song and you used it and like did some funky stuff to it, whatever. Even then, like the record labels usually they're doing license deals to get that stuff done actually, right? But even then, like you can try to argue some stuff with like fair use if you're like remixing it really hard or something. There's all sorts of weird shit.
If it's a parody,
Or if it's a parody. So it's largely been decided that like you cannot do anything in terms of defending your game that designs mechanics outside of the circumstance where someone literally just takes it.
But I think that's why actually games are fairly insulated from these kinds of problems because they're so fucking expensive and time consuming to make.
They're hard to make, so it's hard. And even
audience, and it isn't like, because like with a song, like if you're a really good musician, you can like hear a song and then play it. You know what I mean, right? Mm-hmm. With a video game, it doesn't matter how good you are at making video games. Like, I'm not going to go take Grand Theft Auto 5 and remake it. You know what I mean? Like,
let me just copy paste that into my game. That's
literally, that's why, and you can see that kind of reflected in what happens, practically speaking, for what's defended in the intellectual property space there, right? And that's basically like piracy is the thing that actually in the games industry is meaningfully tackled and people try to deal with it, right? Because literally just stealing it wholesale is the only meaningful way to infringe intellectual property in video games.
Did you guys hear about this public domain music project? So you're talking about chord progression.
Yeah, it was like trying to make every possible song.
Oh, really?
In essence, right?
Yeah, because they're basically like the problem with copywriting like chord progressions and songs and stuff is that there's only so many of them. It is a finite set.
There's a lot.
It's a big
set. Like a language. Yeah. It's like a language, though, right? I mean, there's a lot of chords, and you could smash them together in a lot of different ways and then progress them.
Well, sure, but also like there's
finite. I mean, it's practically speaking infinite as far as it matters.
But there's also a subset of that where
that sounds good.
That sounds good, right? Yeah. And so it's kind of like, so basically there are people like using AI and all kinds of other like machine learning things to produce en masse songs that have unique chord progressions and then put them into the public domain. So that way nobody can copyright them and that way everybody can just use them, but it's fine,
So, I may be completely misremembering this, but isn't that the legal stuff around that the reason why AI generated content was then deemed to be not copyrightable?
I was going to say, isn't that
probably?
Yeah. I think that was kind of like the protection against this. Somebody was like, "Ooh, like it," which is like it's just true, right? It's like if you want copyright to mean anything, then if something can just produce infinite content and copyright all of it, right? Then copyright doesn't mean anything anymore. Right? Yeah. And I think this is like the core argument against like being able to have a concept of intellectual property around AI generated content, which is that AI generated content is effectively infinite, and therefore allowing it to be copyrighted creates a huge fucking mess. Right?
Well, I would say to me, this is no different than there being 8 billion people on the earth, any of whom could make a song, right? So it's like,
but they're not all making songs.
But also that's also why it's decided that there's no way to do that, right? It's just not, unless you literally just take the record. It's like what you're taking is a different thing than the chord progression. The chord progression is not what you're taking. If you're copying the song, like the track,
instrumentation,
just the whole thing, straight up, then but otherwise it just doesn't really matter. I mean, we even had I've had 2 people actually. I had one person a few months ago. A friend of ours from St. Louis sent me a note and saw the Wizard with a Gun trailer and sent me a note immediately and was like, "Oh my God, are they just like ripping off Crashlands too?" And I was surprised because I was like, I mean, doesn't look like it at all to me. And then just like 2 weeks ago, Gary, our mom's
father-in-law,
father-in-law,
or not in-law,
stepdad. Yeah, we were adults, so it's a weird thing,
I always get confused with the proper words for this.
What do you got? He sent me a text and he was like, "Oh my God, he saw his really cool T-shirt that was like an astronaut monkey thing, right? But the color scheme was very fun and very kind of, frankly, very Crashlandsy, right?" And he was like, "Oh, they just like stealing your colors?" And I was like,
Those just are
"Those
colors.
are just colors,
They're not-
baby." Like,
they're not-
yeah, like it's the same thing with the wizard with the gun stuff. It's like there's maybe some like style sensibilities or something that are present, across things, but there's nothing stolen.
But even
in
then,
that
like, so I'm
act of
thinking
that.
about like, remember the Vanilla Ice copyright thing against Queen?
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
So here's the thing. What I don't understand about this is intellectual property law is, it's essentially to like ensure that you can capitalize on your investment.
Yeah, that's the
Right.
idea. It's supposed to be the idea.
So what I want to know is,
And therefore you're promoting people doing it, and therefore things progress.
yeah. So what I want to know is if there's a famous song, right, and then you sample a little piece of it and you put it into your song, and your song becomes famous. It's not like people go, "Wow, I'm not going to listen to that first song anymore because now I got the second one." Like what's the actual damage? Because if anything, it actually reinforces the connection between the two, and it boosts both of them, right?
It does, but if it's a sample where you're literally a sample is basically taking the actual recording, right? Yeah, like
Just
the
a piece
actual
of it.
song, a piece of the song
Yeah.
versus versus chord progression, which is just underlying structure. It's basically
That's
the
what I'm saying. Is
difference between
I don't
code.
think in either case it actually, like in the case of music, I don't think it harms either party, right? Because like if you hear a piece of a song in a song,
It
it's like-
does though, in the sense of like you're assuming basically equal parity as far as previous song was popular and is in this new song is
right.
popular.
So there's
versus-
like that Dido song
Because it's
that got
basically
into an
versus
Eminem song, right?
exploitation. Because the exploitation side of
Exploitation.
this is
That's the problem.
somebody samples a bunch of other people's music and then makes $1 million and then doesn't share any of that.
Yeah,
that
those
they
people didn't
built
make money
off of
off,
other
yeah.
people's work with the other people.
Which
right?
really is back to the whole question mark open with the AI stuff, because they're like, you guys literally took everything that everyone's made.
just all of it.
But
Just
they're not
all of
sampling it.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the problem, right? It's like,
Yeah.
what is that? What did you
What
do?
is it?
Yeah, or they
trained a model
they
on
may
it.
be
Does that-
sampling some of it. Like you don't like for the
Exactly.
literal concept of a sample. Any like image you generate, any like wall of text you generate out of these things, like any piece of it could actually be just like a literal.
I mean, there were some people who
verbatim
found like
component.
some artists who were big enough and they always put their little signatures on stuff.
Yeah, they put their signatures and things.
They literally, if they typed it in, the thing would generate their like signature on a piece.
Yep.
And they're
Yeah.
like, well, I mean, come on, it's like.
Yep.
So I think that's why the AI thing is weird, because it is this strange blend of sample and these like very clearly, like artists do this all the time. You grab pictures, you use reference boards, you make like Pinterest. No one's trying
Well,
to sue the
it's
shit out
why
of
we had that
Pinterest,
whole
right? It's like-
argument of like, well, that's how people learn too, right? Is by mixing and
Yeah.
matching over new stuff,
Yeah.
right? But it's again, it's like because the scale thing becomes an interesting part of the puzzle because all of our systems around what intellectual property means,
Yes.
how you make a living making quote unquote intellectual property to things that are abstract.
None of them can account for this kind of
None
scale
of them,
problem.
yeah, they can't accommodate
At all.
for the fact that a single person now could come in with a tool that can now generate
Infinite.
effectively
Tool-
infinite amounts of that kind of previously sort of more conceptual content that was defendable via all these different kinds of intellectual property laws, right?
Yeah. But what about like a pharmaceutical company uses machine learning to find new chemical compounds, right? It's like they're definitely going to be allowed to patent that.
Yeah, I don't think they should be.
Definitely, right?
Yeah. I
They're
also
gonna-
don't
they're
think
gonna
they
be.
should- Oh, no, I know they're going to be,
Yeah.
right? I'm just
That-
saying.
that's what I'm saying is,
I
like,
agree
yeah,
they shouldn't
you're-
be allowed to, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
'Cause
you're
it-
correct that all of our systems kind of assume that only people have ideas.
Yeah.
And that ideas are kind of rare and hard to come by, and good ones especially, right? But now it's like, okay, but like what if machines can have ideas and they can have trillions of them
And they
every second?
look kind of like the ideas that this other person had, and they were sort of trained up on the ideas that
Yeah.
other person had.
But like
I mean,
machines
it's
can't
the
own a
same
thing.
but it's the same idea too.
It's-
If like if a person comes out, they've been and they're a good artist, right? But all of their art looks exactly like some other artists who came before them. Exactly, right? Like we also hate that. We call bullshit on that too, right? Where we're like, come up with your own fucking style. Is kind of.
But this is
the
also
vibe,
what's
right?
interesting though is like traditionally in any art domain, so games included, people talk a lot about essentially like building on the people who you take inspiration from, right?
Yeah,
and that's how you're basically kind of like continuing the conversation into the future. By you take some of this, you take some of that, you mix it together, you make your own stuff, and it goes forward. And I think what's interesting about it is like, again, once it's not people doing it, the whole thing just gets weird. And also the payment things. It's not like,
because the
it's not like I'm
reason
reaching
that we
out.
have the defenses in the first place were to support human beings. Making
Exactly.
stuff, right? Yeah.
So, but I think what's interesting is it's not like any game that comes out reaches backward. Let's say the artists put a mood board together, right? Using a bunch of pictures off of Pinterest from like 1,000 different people's artwork they found through Twitter, through ArtStation or whatever. You don't go like there's no one's getting paid, you know what I mean, for supplying that inspiration. And also it's like if you go to a museum and look at some stuff, even if it's contemporary works, like you're not, even if you go make something that you were inspired by there, there's no traceable thing that ties you together. And also it'd be really weird if you had to somehow figure that out. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
you know?
every time we make a game, we don't think back through all the games we've played and potentially influenced us and contact the developers and send them some cash because we played their game.
But
at some
also,
point.
we're not literally just taking all the existing parts of their game and mixing and mashing them together to create the game either, right? It's
Well, we
there's
are
this-
though in some
No,
ways.
well, very abstractly and metaphorically, but versus AI that literally just has all that data in it. It's in there, right? And it's mixing and matching literally from the data, which is not the same thing as like inspiration.
I don't know. I mean,
What's so strange about it? You know, it's like I think it's so weird to try to figure out. And really what it comes down to is the fact that it's hard to live, right, without money. And so
I mean, it's impossible.
Everybody's-
you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
it's just not possible. And so what you really end up with is this like sort of mass exploitation feeling where previously you had what was essentially a culture, like a cultural feeling, which was like, oh, we're building on the art of the past and mixing and matching these masters together and using new materials. And that seems cool because it's culture building, right? But then when it's like OpenAI now has this machine that just spits out images and you pay them and you don't even know whose references are going into the shit that you're providing. You're just like Unreal, 8K resolution, illustration, you know, whose stuff is in there? And it's like, you don't know. The fucking model apparently doesn't even know
Everyone's.
specifically, but it's everyone's sort of smashed together. I don't know. It's just fucking weird.
Yeah, which is, I mean, this is all examples of the same general problem, right? Which is we live under an economic system that doesn't make any sense.
It's built around resource guarding.
It's built around resource guarding and exploitation and monopolization, right? That's like
What's
that's
fascinating is
how
that
our
it-
system works. And when you try to apply those same principles, it's easy when it's like you have a piece of land because it's like there's a physical fucking thing. You can try to keep people off of it. You can have
The more
really
abstract shit
concrete
gets,
rules.
it
Yeah,
starts
what-
getting real weird, right?
Yeah, once you're
Where
talking
like,
about songs and art and video games, it's like everything is weird and it's really fucking. And it's like, I mean, think about it, like you hear stories all the time too, even the concrete stuff. Because again, the law is arbitrary, right? It's arbitrarily enforced and it differs every fucking. You take a step and the laws are different now, right? So like, it's so chaotic, and that's also true for stuff that seems like it should be straightforward and obvious, right? You know, it's like again, property laws. It's like. Once you get into court, though, you can make any fucking argument you want. If somebody buys it, then you didn't violate the law, actually, right? And now it's fine. Or you did, even though you obviously didn't. You know what I mean?
it's also
And
interesting.
that's true for the concrete stuff, which is all to say,
Yeah.
my opinion on is like there's a handful of things that we've done for intellectual property protection, which are basically to say like we do kind of minimal piracy control kinds of things, right? Because again, the most difficult, very minimal, because the most costly to us is just people outright copying and stealing it. But for the most part, that's going to happen and can't be stopped, you know? So we have very minimal stuff that's mostly protecting things like our own server costs and that kind of stuff, right? And then we have trademarks on our core names of things, right? Because trademarks are actually defendable. And actually easy because again, most of what we're defending against is like on YouTube if someone's using it or on the App Store.
Trademarks are actually a positive thing because that's basically it allows you as a customer, if you see the trademark on something, you're like, I know who made that.
Yeah.
As opposed to if anybody could slap a logo on it.
It's actually more customer protective in my opinion than it is like
Yeah, exactly.
it can be you can exploit it too, like you know, Monster, was it Monster Energy Drink that was, or the other one, or some other Monster company, or Monster Cables. Is that what it was? There's a company called Monster something that sued, this is like a few years ago, but it sued every company in the fucking universe who had a name that had Monster in it, right? Just like,
which is a lot. Spoiler.
yeah, and like
also
it was like little companies, but they just sued everybody because they had the idiot belief, because it's actually not literally true that to maintain your trademark you have to sue anybody who has the remotest whiff of maybe like
A
infringing.
lawyer
on
will
trademark
tell you that because that's how lawyers get
That's how
paid,
they make
so you gotta
money,
be
right?
careful there.
So they got
tricky.
hijacked basically by some legal assholes. You
It
know,
was like, oh yeah, we should sue everyone with the name monster.
and then they did, right? So any of these tools, any legal tool, period, can be used violently and exploitatively, right? But I think trademark is like the only one that's fairly unambiguous, actually, and like the goals, it's pretty straightforward. It's a lot easier to understand what it is. It's the scope is very limited, right?
Yeah, the goal is to prevent confusion. And so for example, like when we were looking at Levelhead stuff, we found that like there's a company that makes a specific type of a golf tee that they call a Levelhead because it's got some kind of a leveling thing. And there's no trademark danger there because no human being on earth would see golf tee and platformer video game on Steam and be like, I don't know which is which.
But there was a closer one though, which was there was that meditation app that was called Levelhead.
And it's only closer just because it's digital.
Because it's an app, But it's one of those things. Like part of what we did there was that if we file a trademark on Levelhead, and we get that trademark, then it also means that now when those other companies, if they decide to be litigious about it, right, then we can be like, well, look, we have a trademark on it, and if you look at the list of because like trademarks have categories too, right, that they protect within, and it'd be like there's no overlap between these categories, so like
ours is under entertainment or whatever.
So the incentive then, so basically we dramatically reduce because they can still sue us because you can sue anybody, but we dramatically reduce the incentive to do it. And also if somebody in the future goes around looking at, they're like, ooh, I want to name my game Levelhead, and they don't know about Levelhead, and for some reason don't just do a Google search, they could search basically all the trademarks and be like, what trademarks have level or head or Levelhead in them, right? And they'd find ours and be like, oh, we shouldn't do this, right? We should come up with a different, which is what we did too. Like any time we've had any title for anything, we did a trademark search to make sure that we weren't likely to get into trouble. So it also kind of serves as a nice like index of other brands that might, conflict with the one that we're trying to create. And
of course, like you got to be careful. You can't know everything. Sometimes you'll do an exhaustive research and be like, okay, I've got a good name for a thing, blah, blah, blah. And then later you find out there was something from long ago that you had no way of knowing about. But at that point, then it's also, again, like the whole point of it is confusion. If it's like a discontinued product or something, it doesn't matter. It's fine, All right, we got time for one last question. You guys ready?
Yeah.
All right, this question comes from irdumb, who says,
I love dumb questions.
Who says, greetings. I fell off the side of the earth shortly after the first Shenana Jam, which I think was 2017.
Been a minute,
I think. Yeah. And now I've come back to upwards of 300 podcast episodes to catch up on. Do you have any recommendations for how I should ingest this backlog of episodes? Also, I won't hear your advice until long in the future once I catch up on the episodes.
This is truly a dumb question.
How will that work? Care to leave me a time capsule for when I do catch up? As an aside, congrats on Levelhead. I played through the whole campaign and it was a treat.
I love the idea of saying, I'm going to ask you a question. I would love an answer in like 150 hours.
Yep.
300 hours.
Oh, right. Yeah, like 300 hours.
Yeah, all right. So here's what you're going to do. So by this point, you have caught up, okay?
But there's 100 more episodes.
Yeah, because
depending on how fast.
So now that you've caught up to this point, but you still have at least 100 more hours to go because we'll see in a couple of years when you finally get caught up. Is you actually have a golden opportunity here that not many people, well, everybody has, but not many people realize they have, right? Which is you now have 100 hours that you're definitely going to spend over the next year or two just listening to something, which means like those are 100 hours that you can't do much else, right? Like you can't, for example, like study for school or blah, blah, blah. So what can you do with those 100 hours? You could, for example, start running, like start jogging and listen to the podcast while you jog.
You're saying because you know what's coming.
You're going to dedicate this time. How can you double up on it?
Double dip.
Get more out of it.
So you're like, so this has become, we're a grind set podcast. Right?
Oh, rise and grind, baby.
Rise and grind.
Put your face in the grass until you got no nose.
Well, this isn't about the hustle. This is about self-care. Self-care.
But there's another form of self-care, which is lounging on the couch with a cat on your chest, listening to a podcast, which honestly, it's pretty fucking dope.
That's also pretty good.
Yep.
I think lounging for several hundred hours does get a little bit
It depends on how you distribute it, you know.
A little bit tiresome, but yeah. Yeah, if you're going one a week, yeah. But basically my point being, you know, you're going to be setting aside this time. Can you like better yourself in another way?
Yeah, so what you're saying is if you're listening to the podcast, like you're not getting much out of it. So the question is, how do you is that if
all right, so for me, for example, when I'm having on a phone conversation with somebody, I can't just sit there, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
I can't just stand
I gotta
in one
pace
spot.
and-
Yeah, you got to pace. You got to and I'll be doing dishes or you know.
I do
whatever.
notes sometimes. Just
that might
for
not
fun.
be normal though, because we do all have ADHD.
Yeah, I take notes, which is
Yeah,
weird.
but point being, like, you know, what about like deep cleaning your house while you're listening to the podcast? You know, like there's stuff you could do while you're listening to podcasts. It's not to say that you don't get value from the podcast. It's just that only your ears and mind are occupied. Is there some chores or things that you've been wanting to?
But that is assuming
of?
that you're not already, because like I listen to podcasts. It's the kind of the other way around for me, right? It's like mostly I listen to podcasts while I'm doing chores, like while I'm getting ready in the morning, while I'm in the shower.
Yeah.
You know, like it's already being doubled upon. But it's kind of the other way around, you know, where it's like,
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying is there's no reason it doesn't have to go the other way. Where you're like, I'm going to listen to a podcast for the next hour. What else can I do while I'm listening? You know, just go for
My
it.
suggestion would be to put it on 2x speed. You know what I mean?
I would
Because clearly, if you got a thing for falling off the earth and being 300 episodes behind, I don't know if that's going to change. You know what I mean? I don't know where you're at.
You got to get caught up.
So that will help you in the long run, just sort of reduce the amount of catch up you have to do technically by just speeding it up a lot.
But it
And
also
if you do
depends
that, like for
on-
50 hours, you'll understand probably the words.
Yeah, but it really depends on why you're listening to the podcast, you know, because like if you just like hearing the voices, then, you know, it's going to have to one exit because otherwise
Is
the
it
voices get
ASMR
weird.
for you?
Is it
You know?
ASMR?
I don't know.
Is it that you like our is it that you like our aggressive takes on particular topics, you know? Because if so, like, do you want those to be current? Because in that case,
Do you
should
want the
probably jump to the
crypto
end.
highlights?
Yeah, do you want the- then you probably should stay more up to date and like listen backwards instead of forwards, because otherwise, by the time you hear our hot takes, they're really out of date. If you think about it, like even our NFT hot takes, right, which were going strong even as of a few months ago. In the world, though, nobody's fucking talking about NFTs anymore. They've become irrelevant besides being a joke, right? And in the next like couple of years, that'll be even more true. And so if you, dear listener, are like, if it's 2027 and you're listening to our podcast from 6 months ago where we're just fucking ripping apart how stupid NFTs are, right? You might be like, what's an NFT? I forgot about that. I forgot that
Never
even
heard of this.
existed.
It sounds so dumb. Why would someone try and do
I think what's an NFT is the only proper response to anybody talking about NFTs in any.
Honestly, that's really good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, have you seen like the new NFTs?
And then after they explain it, be like, but what is it?
I like the fact that it's defined by what it isn't, you know, it's a non-fungible token. That's its whole thing is what it's not, you know, which is
Yeah, I saw a great.
somehow
I think it was like a
beautiful,
like a Julie Noki on YouTube had like a
she's hilarious.
fucking hilarious NFT comedy sketch where she's like, "I'm gonna get some NFTs. They're non fungible," and the person's like, "What is that?" And she's like, "Just try to funge it."
yeah, you can't.
See, yeah, you can't funge that. Funge my token. You can't. It's an NFT. It's like, yeah, I mean it's funging. You can't funge it. You can't do anything else with it, but you definitely can't funge it.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Unless you wanted to, you could actually you could funge it.
They're actually extremely
There's
fungible.
nothing preventing you from funging it. Even though, which I think again just like underlines the point of the pointlessness.
Well, you can't funge
token.
the token, but you can funge the thing that the token's attached to with ease. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but it's also,
Yeah.
but that allows you to funge the token. You know, it's like you could just,
essentially,
because the non-fungible just means you can't basically exchange one for another because they don't have equal value, right? But the value is arbitrary and
But
just
they do have
like-
equal value because they have no value. You know what I'm saying? That's
Yeah,
the tricky
exactly.
part.
That's that.
It's-
That's where they've
it's,
gotten to. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I buy a donut. I've got a receipt. Sam walks up and eats my donut. And I'm like, what? You can't do that. And he's like, but I did though.
Yeah.
It's gone. I have a receipt though. Yeah, it doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah,
if you have
I don't care about
a
your
receipt.
receipt.
Donut's gone. It
Your
got
receipt
somebody
is
else.
trash and worth nothing, especially
The
to me.
receipt does nothing to prevent somebody from eating my
Sam
donut.
says, "Get funged, noob,"
Yep.
and he laughs and runs off into the distance.
Yep.
Yeah, I hate when people funge my donuts.
Yeah.
It
Ugh.
pisses me off so much.
fucking bullshit.
Anyways, that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And as always, if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam, give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It'll boost it in the algorithms and the store charts, and it'll help us out quite a bit as we ramp up towards the launch of this game. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Blah.